The first sound is not a sound at all, but a vibration. A deep, tectonic groan that travels up through the ice, through the wooden pilings of the hut, and into the bones of the men inside. The entire world, this vast island of ice they call home, is shifting in its sleep. A lamp swings on its chain, casting frantic shadows. Outside, the Arctic night is a living entity. It is not an empty darkness, but a screaming, wind-whipped void where temperatures have frozen the very air into crystalline needles. The cold here is a predator. It hunts for weakness, for a missed glove, for a split seam in a fur hood. Against this immense, uncaring force stands a single, defiant structure. The polar station, North Pole 6. It is not a building, but a crate of wood and desperation bolted to the ice. Snow has sculpted it into a featureless mound, with only a single ice-encrusted window, glowing a sickly yellow. Inside, survival is a loud, smelly, meticulous ritual. The space is dominated by the ragged roar of a diesel generator, its rhythm the station's heartbeat. The air is thick with the stench of fuel, wet wool, and the metallic tang of fear sweat that never fully dissipates. Ivan, the station chief, is a man carved from that same ice. His face is a map of old frostbite scars and deeper, unseen lines of responsibility. He is not reading the weather charts on the wall. He is interrogating them. His eyes dart from a plotted pressure system over Svalbard to a cryptic notebook. Only he opens. His hands, large and scarred, are perfectly still. But a muscle twitches in his jaw. A silent tell. He is a man waiting for a ghost from his past to finally knock on the door. Suddenly, the generator sputters. The light flickers, plunging the hut into a terrifying half-darkness, before roaring back. In that instant of near blackness, every man freezes. The sound is their lifeline. Its failure is death. Mikhail, the old technician they call dead, is already moving before the sputter ends. He is a creature of grease and pragmatism. He throws open the engine compartment, releasing a cloud of oily heat into the cold. His hands, blackened and nimble, move with a frantic, loving precision. "The fuel line is icing again," he grunts, his voice barely audible over the din. "The filter is clogged with crap. Another hour and we'd be popsicles." His work is not maintenance. It is a battle against entropy, fought every minute of every day. At the radio desk, Sergei, the radio man, watches Dead's struggle with cold appraisal. He is younger, his uniform shirt still buttoned tightly at the throat despite the oppressive heat. He is the party's eye and ear here. He logs everything: the weather data, the fuel consumption, the moods of the men. His coded transmissions to the mainland are his sacred liturgy. He distrusts the silence between the official reports, the glances Ivan shares with the young meteorologist, Alexei. For Sergei, chaos is not just the storm outside. It is any deviation from the plan. And then there is Alexei. Huddled over a desk littered with parchment, he is a figure of frenetic energy. At 24, he is the youngest, a prodigy plucked from university, for a mind that sees patterns in chaos. Right now, that mind is racing. He is not just recording the data from the last balloon launch, he is chasing a phantom. He has plotted a nascent low-pressure system east of Greenland, a mere whisper on the barometer. But his calculations, scribbled in the margins of official forms, scream that this whisper will become a roar destined for the English Channel. He looks up, his eyes wide with a terrible excitement, seeking Ivan's gaze. The fifth man is a silent monument to the ice's cruelty. Yuri, the magnetician, lies swaddled in blankets on a bunk. His feet, wrapped in bandages, are a mass of blackened flesh and yellow pus. Severe frostbite from a routine instrument check that turned into a 15-minute fight for life in a sudden whiteout. His feverish mumblings are a constant reminder. The Arctic gives no second chances. The ritual demands another sacrifice to the data. It is time for the night observation. Ivan and Alexei layer on furs, transforming into hulking, anonymous shapes. Ivan checks Alexei's gear with a surgeon's intensity. Every strap, every clasp. A mistake here is fatal. They blast open the reinforced door, and the storm invades. The wind is a physical wall, a howl that erases all other sound. The cold punches the air from their lungs. Their world collapses to the feeble yellow cone of a kerosene lantern, illuminating a hellscape of driving snow. Alexei fights his way to the instrument shelter, his mittened hands fumbling with the latch. The mercury in the thermometer is a sluggish silver slug, huddled at the bottom of its glass prison. He shouts the reading, the wind stealing his words. Ivan, clinging to the anemometer post, reads the wind speed from a dial already glazing with ice. It is a routine they have performed 1,000 times. But as Alexei turns, the lantern light catches something. A dark, irregular shape, about 50 meters away, where the ice meets the chaotic pressure ridge. It is not a smooth hummock of wind-blown snow. It has angles, sharp, unnatural angles. He stares, his brain refusing to process. It could be a shadow, a trick of the storm. He yanks Ivan's sleeve, pointing frantically. Ivan shields his eyes, peering into the maelstrom. For a long moment he sees nothing. Then, a shift in the snow, and the shape resolves. It is the wreckage of a plywood crate, splintered and half-buried. Supply drop debris. Nothing more. But the look Ivan gives Alexei is not one of reassurance. It is a look of shared, icy dread. That crate was from a drop 2 months ago, in a location 5 kilometers southwest. The ice has moved it. Their entire world, their island, is drifting faster and more unpredictably than Moscow's models predicted. They are not on a stable platform. They are on a raft, adrift in a hostile ocean. They stagger back inside, crusted in ice, their beards frozen solid. They are greeted not by warmth, but by a new kind of tension. Sergei is hunched over the radio, his face pale in the green glow of the dials. A message is coming through on a frequency reserved for catastrophes and war. The rhythmic clatter of the Morse key is the only sound. Click, clack, click, click, clack, click. It is a sound of pure authority, cutting through the storm, the generator's rumble, Yuri's delirious moans. Sergei writes, decrypts in his head, and his hand slows. He finishes, rips the sheet from his pad, and hands it to Ivan without a word. His eyes are hard, searching Ivan's face for a crack. Ivan reads the 5 words. His expression does not change. He does not blink. But the atmosphere in the hut undergoes a fundamental change. The air becomes charged, electric, thinner. The routine of survival is over. The mission has begun. He walks to the small stove, holds the edge of the paper in the blue flame. It blackens, curls, vanishes into ash. Then he turns to Alexei. Not to Sergei, not to Dead, but to the young meteorologist, whose eyes are still wide from what they saw in the storm. Ivan's voice, when it comes, is low, flat, and carries the finality of a vault door closing. Alexei, forget the Barents Sea. Plot the Atlantic sequence. From Greenland to the Irish Sea. Use the secondary cipher. The real forecast starts now. He reaches into a hidden compartment under the floor and places a sealed, wax-covered packet on Alexei's desk. It is labeled with a single, typewritten word: Prometheus. Outside, the ice groans again, a long, deep sound of parting. The station, North Pole 6, is no longer just a scientific outpost. It has become the most remote and vulnerable intelligence front of the coming war. And the clock, driven by the very weather they are trying to decipher, has just started ticking. The packet sat on Alexei's desk like a live grenade with the pin pulled. The single word, Prometheus, seemed to pulse in the dim light. The mundane clutter of his weather charts, the coffee mug stains, the worn pencil stubs, all of it receded into insignificance. This was different. This was the vortex. Ivan did not offer an explanation. He did not need to. His actions were a manifesto. He moved to the station's main logbook, the thick, leather-bound volume that recorded their official existence for Moscow. With deliberate, calm strokes, he began to falsify entries. He altered barometric readings by fractions, shifted wind direction notations, created a pristine, believable record of a completely mundane Arctic night. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, woven to pass the most rigorous inspection. Sergei watched from his radio corner, his fingers paused above his own log, his eyes narrowed to slits. He saw the sacrilege. The official record was holy. Ivan was desecrating it. Alexei's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal. Inside were not orders, but tools. A new set of mapping grids, scaled for the North Atlantic, not the Kara Sea. A list of coordinates for weather stations that did not officially exist. A Danish outpost in Greenland, a Norwegian shack on Jan Mayen, a Canadian relay in Labrador, and a cipher key, a complex alphanumeric matrix that transformed mundane observations into a language of strategic destiny. This was the architecture of a shadow war, fought with isobars and millibars. His personal space became a command bunker. He pinned the new grid over the old one, a ghostly transparency of the coming conflict. He now tracked two weather systems, the one for the Soviet convoys, and the true target, the serpentine jet stream over the Atlantic, the great river of air that steered storms toward Europe. He worked in a feverish silence, broken only by the scratch of his pencil and the low, pained breathing of Yuri in his bunk. The numbers danced, formed patterns, collapsed, and reformed. He was chasing a ghost, the precise meteorological signature of a hypothetical day, months in the future, on a coastline he had never seen. Dead was the silent accomplice. He understood machinery, not politics, but he understood survival. When Ivan gave him a modified parts list, Dead asked no questions. He began cannibalizing non-essential equipment. A spare radio valve, copper wire from a broken heater, spare battery acid, all were quietly repurposed. He built a secondary, low-power transmitter from scrap, its components hidden inside the housing of the main generator. It was an ugly, beautiful piece of treasonous engineering. Its only purpose was to send one message on one frequency when the time came. Dead tuned it in secret, the faint, almost inaudible carrier wave hissing like a secret shared with the void. The tension in the hut crystallized around Sergei. He was a man built on certainty, and certainty was evaporating. He conducted his scheduled transmissions with robotic precision, but his ears were tuned to the unscheduled sounds. The hushed conference between Ivan and Alexei over a midnight chart, the faint, unfamiliar electrical whine from Dead's corner, the absence of Yuri's pain log in the official record. He began his own audit. He checked supply counts against Ivan's reports. He re-listened to tape recordings of their last communications with the supply ship, searching for a coded phrase, a hesitation. He was no longer just a radio man. He was an inquisitor building a case. The external world, the indifferent killer, chose this moment to sharpen its claws. A storm descended that was of a different order. It was not a blizzard, but a purga. A wind of such velocity it scoured the ice down to bare blue glass. The hut shuddered, as if in the grips of a giant. The temperature plummeted another 20 degrees. The world outside their walls ceased to exist, replaced by a horizontal, screaming white fury. And then the lights died. The generator's roar choked into silence. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than the storm's scream. It was the sound of the void winning. In the absolute suffocating blackness, the cold began its immediate invasive assault. It seeped through the walls, a visible frost racing across the interior planking. Yuri moaned in his bunk. "Primary fuel pump." Dead's voice cut through the dark, calm and final. "The filter is completely glaciated. We have auxiliary power for the radio for 10 minutes. Then the batteries freeze." Ivan's voice was a command in the darkness. "Sergei, notify the mainland of our status. Standard emergency code, Alexei, with me." A flashlight beam stabbed the gloom. Ivan threw open the equipment locker, pulling out a spare pump housing. It was empty, a useless shell. The critical internal filter was a specialized part. The only spare was in the external storage shed, 10 meters from the door, in the heart of the purga. "Give me the light," Ivan said, already bundling himself into his furs with a terrifying speed. Alexei's hand shot out, grabbing Ivan's arm. "Chief, you go out there alone. You won't come back. The wind will take you off the ice." "It's not a request, Alexei." "It's not just your mission," Alexei hissed, the words torn from him by fear and a sudden, shocking loyalty. "You need a lifeline, a tether. I'm the light. You're the hands." The decision hung in the frozen air. Ivan saw the logic and the courage. He gave a single sharp nod. They rigged a climbing rope, tying it around both their waists, a 10-foot length of hemp between life and a lonely death. They prepared for battle. Ivan would carry the tools. Alexei would hold the lantern and the spare part bag, and his only job was to plant his feet and be an anchor. Opening the door was an act of violence. The storm exploded into the space, a blast of microscopic ice needles that felt like gunfire. They plunged into the white madness. The flashlight beam was useless, reflecting back off the solid wall of driven snow. They navigated by memory and touch, crawling along a guide rope Dead had long ago fixed to the ice. Alexei's world shrank to the vague, hunched shape of Ivan 2 body lengths ahead, and the rope biting into his waist. The wind tried to pry him from the ice. It screamed in a pitch that bypassed the ears and vibrated in the skull. He focused on the rope, on the tension. It was their only dialogue. Then, the tension vanished. The rope went slack. Alexei's heart stopped. He lunged forward, screaming Ivan's name, the wind stealing the sound. He followed the limp rope, his mittens scraping over ice. 3 meters. 5. He found Ivan at the edge of a crevasse. A hairline fracture in the ice floe, masked by snow, had yawned open under his weight. Ivan was clinging to the lip, his legs dangling over a bottomless blue-black chasm. His tools were gone, swallowed by the deep. Alexei dropped to his stomach, spreading his weight. He seized Ivan's wrists. The older man's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a furious, burning intensity. "The part!" Ivan roared over the wind. "In my chest pocket! Get it!" Letting go with one hand, Alexei fumbled at Ivan's frozen parka, his fingers numb. He felt the hard, cylindrical shape of the filter. He wrenched it free, shoved it into his own pocket, and then grabbed Ivan's arm again with both hands. He had no strength to pull him up. He could only be a human hook, holding on until his muscles tore. He locked his eyes with Ivan's. There were no words. There was only the rope, the howl, and the unspoken truth passing between them. The mission was in the pocket of the younger man. Ivan's survival was now a personal battle. With a guttural roar that came from a place deeper than the storm, Alexei braced his boots against an ice ridge and pulled. It was an impossible act. But slowly, incrementally, Ivan's torso emerged from the crevasse. They crawled backwards, a four-limbed, terrified creature, until they collapsed against the shed. They found the shed door iced shut. Alexei beat at it with the lantern until the latch broke. Inside, they huddled for a single minute of shuddering, breathless respite. The return journey was a blur of agony. When they finally fell back through the hut door, they were more ice than men. Ded and Sergei pulled them in, sealing the world out. Ded had the filter installed in 3 minutes. He hit the ignition. The generator coughed, sputtered a plume of black smoke, and then roared back to life. Light and heat flooded the hut. A painful, glorious relief. As feeling returned in searing, needle-like waves, Alexei looked across the room. Ivan was staring at him, his face still etched with the strain of the crevasse. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But his gaze held a new, profound recognition. The hierarchy of the station had irrevocably shifted. Sergei, meanwhile, was not looking at the resurrected men. He was looking at the floor. His flashlight beam was fixed on the puddle of meltwater forming at Alexei's feet. In it, slowly uncurling, was a small, water-stained piece of paper. A fragment of a chart with unfamiliar Atlantic coordinates and a series of numbers written in Alexei's hand, next to a single encrypted word Sergei's cipher key could not decode: Neptune. The secret was no longer fully contained. It had leaked, literally, onto the floor. Sergei said nothing. He just turned off his light and returned to his radio desk, his back a rigid wall of silent accusation. The battle lines within the hut were now as clearly drawn as the isobars on Alexei's ghost grid. The storm outside was merely a backdrop. The real blizzard was just beginning. The thaw never truly came. The external cold was merely supplanted by an internal frost that settled over the hut. The puddle that had betrayed the Atlantic chart evaporated, but its ghost lingered in the air. Sergei moved through his duties with a new, chilling efficiency. His transmissions became models of brevity. He no longer engaged in the forced, stale jokes of men in isolation. His silence was a listening device, his gaze a forensic tool sweeping over their every move. The hut became a pressure cooker with a sealed lid, and Sergei was the steadily climbing gauge. The focus of their world narrowed to a single agonizing point: Yuri. The frostbite had turned gangrenous. The sweet, cloying smell of rotting flesh now undercut the smells of fuel and stew. Yuri's feverish ramblings grew louder, more coherent in their horror. He spoke of his daughters, of a sunny field near Kiev, of the German shells that had preceded the cold as the greater evil. He was a living, breathing testament to the cost of this place, a cost the official reports would simply list as non-combat casualty, extreme environment. Ivan made the decision. It was not a medical choice. It was a tactical one. Yuri needed a real doctor, antibiotics, surgery. He needed the hospital ship that accompanied the seasonal supply convoy. The next rendezvous, their only lifeline to the world, was in 72 hours at Grid Point Vega, a moving patch of ice 20 kilometers to the southeast. They would have to move the entire station. The announcement was a detonation. Moving North Pole 6 was not a relocation. It was a perilous surgical operation on their own home. It meant dismantling the antenna array, packing the most sensitive instruments, preparing the sledges, and trusting the treacherous ice to hold their weight for a 20-kilometer gauntlet. And it meant doing it all under the watchful eye of a man who might already be composing a report of treason. Preparations became a silent, frantic ballet of desperation. Dead worked himself into a state of near collapse, his hands a blur of grease and purpose. He calibrated the portable diesel sledges, their tracked engines their only hope of hauling the tonnage of their existence. Every gram mattered. Non-essential scientific gear was jettisoned. Personal effects were reduced to a single small bag per man. But Ivan gave one non-negotiable order. All meteorological records, both official and shadow, would be transported. Every chart, every log, every scrap of Prometheus data. They were more valuable than food. Alexei's task was the most delicate. He had to condense months of atmospheric modeling into a transportable, yet comprehensive, forecast. The final Prometheus packet. He worked in a state of hyper-focused mania, distilling the chaotic dance of pressure systems into a series of stark, predictive conclusions. He identified a pattern, a recurring weakness in the North Atlantic storm track, a potential window. He plotted it on a final clean chart, a span of 36 hours in early June 1944. He labeled it with the operational cipher, Neptune Juno. The weight of the prediction felt physical, a leaden certainty in his gut. This was it. The ghost had been given a shape and a date. The night before the move, Ivan called Alexei outside under the pretext of checking the perimeter. The aurora borealis draped the sky in an eerie, silent curtain of green and violet light. It was beautiful and utterly indifferent. Ivan's voice was low, stripped bare. The supply ship carries a special officer from Naval Intelligence. My only contact. You will not look at him. You will not speak to him. When Dead is unloading the fuel drums, you will be with him, carrying the instrument crate, the one with the false bottom. You will slip. The crate will crack open against the ice. You will be furious, embarrassed. You will gather the contents quickly, in chaos. The Prometheus packet will be among them. He will pick it up. He will hand it back to you. That is the transfer. One touch. That is all. The plan was a house of cards in a hurricane. Alexei could only nod, the enormity of it closing his throat. Dawn on move day was a monochrome hellscape. The process was a slow-motion disaster from the start. The lead sledge carrying the main hut sections broke through a snow bridge into a hidden melt channel. 2 hours were lost in nightmarish effort, men up to their chests in freezing slush, ropes burning through gloves to haul it out. Everyone was soaked, the cold bonding their clothing to their skin with a deadly intimacy. They pushed on. The convoy was a pathetic, creeping centipede of suffering against the infinite white. Sergei drove one of the sledges, his face a mask of grim endurance, but his eyes were constantly active, cataloging. He noted the crate Alexei guarded with unusual intensity. He noted the whispered consultations between Ivan and Dead. After 6 brutal hours, they spotted the dark smudge on the horizon that was the Soviet icebreaker Murman and its smaller supply tender, locked in the ice at Grid Point Vega. Relief was a tangible, painful wave. It was short-lived. As they began the final approach, Alexei saw it first. A second, thinner column of smoke a few kilometers beyond the Murman. It was not Soviet. The silhouette was wrong, lower, sleeker. A sense of primal dread seized him. He pointed, yelling a warning that was torn away by the wind. Ivan raised his binoculars. His body went rigid. German, he uttered. The word a death sentence. A Type 7 U-boat. Topside. They're not here for us. They're here for the Murman. Or the weather data. Pandemonium, silent and efficient, erupted. Ivan barked orders. They would proceed as if oblivious. The transfer had to happen. It was now their only hope of the data surviving. The risk had just multiplied by a factor of 1,000. The rendezvous was a surreal tableau of normalcy played out on the edge of an abyss. Soviet sailors shouted greetings, throwing down gangplanks. The familiar burly figure of the supply officer, Vasily, waved from the deck. And all the while, every man's nerves were stretched taut, eyes flicking to that second, poisonous column of smoke on the horizon. The dance began. Ded and Alexei maneuvered the heavy instrument crate down the ramp from their sledge. Alexei's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment. He caught Vasily's eye for a fraction of a second. A cold, professional flicker of recognition. As planned, Alexei's foot hit a patch of glare ice. He let go of the crate with a genuine, terrified yell. It slammed onto the ice, the sound a sickening crack of splintering wood. Chaos. Sailors rushed to help. Ded cursed with impressive creativity, throwing open the broken lid. Papers, instruments, spare parts spilled onto the filthy ice. Alexei scrambled, his hands numb, gathering the mess. And there it was. The oilskin-wrapped Prometheus packet. He reached for it. A boot came down on it. A black, rubber-soled naval boot. Alexei froze, looking up. It was not Vasily. It was a German officer, clad in a white camouflage parka over his gray uniform. He had come from nowhere, with 2 armed sailors flanking him, their Schmeisser submachine guns held at a casual, lethal angle. His face was lean, intellectual, and bore a thin, polite smile. "Clumsy," the German said in clear, accented Russian. "Such valuable things, on such unstable ground." Time stopped. Alexei's vision tunneled. He saw Ivan 10 meters away, his hand inching toward the pistol hidden under his parka. He saw Sergei, watching from the sledge, his face a complex map of shock and dawning, horrific understanding. He saw Vasily, frozen on the gangplank, his mission and his life hanging in the balance. The German officer bent down, not taking his eyes off Alexei. He picked up the Prometheus packet. He weighed it in his hand, his smile never wavering. He was not looking at the spilled thermometers or barometers. He was looking at the singular wrong package. Interesting packaging for standard instruments, he mused, his voice a soft, menacing purr. It looks important. In that suspended second, the fate of the invasion, the lives of everyone on the ice, and the secret of the Arctic hung on a knife's edge. The transfer had happened, but to the wrong hands. The world constricted to the space between the German officer's gloved hand and the oilskin packet. The wind died in Alexei's ears, replaced by a high-pitched whine of pure terror. He saw the micro-expressions on the German's face. Not triumph, but curiosity, sharpening into predatory focus. This was a man who hunted secrets, and he had just stumbled upon a scent. Ivan's movement was not an attack. It was a diversion born of sheer, calculated audacity. He didn't go for his gun. Instead, he stumbled forward, his body a clumsy, frantic bear of a man, crashing into one of the German sailors. He shouted, a slurry of panicked Russian about the crate, about expensive state property, about his own incompetence. He became a buffoon, a pathetic station chief, grabbing at the sailor's arm, his face a mask of theatrical despair. The officer's focus shattered for a crucial half-second. His head snapped toward the commotion, the smile freezing into a grimace of irritation. The muzzle of the nearest Schmeisser wavered, swinging toward Ivan. In that sliver of fractured attention, Dead acted. He didn't look at the packet. He looked at the ice. With a guttural roar that was pure, undiluted fury, he lifted the massive, half-empty instrument crate, a wooden box weighing over 100 pounds, and hurled it, not at the Germans, but at the ice directly between Alexei and the officer. The crate exploded on impact, but the sound was wrong. Not just wood splintering, but a deep, resonant crack, a sound that vibrated up through the boots of every man standing there. A spiderweb of black fissures shot out from the point of impact, a lethal flower blooming instantly across the ice floe. The ground became a trap. The ice groaned, a living, wounded thing. The German officer's eyes went wide with genuine physical fear. He instinctively leapt backward, his boot slipping on the newly treacherous surface. The precious packet tumbled from his grip, skittering across the ice toward a widening lead of inky black water. Everything became chaos, a slow-motion ballet of survival. Soviet sailors shouted, scrambling back toward their ship's gangway, which now swayed dangerously as the ice pulled away from the hull. The German sailors, discipline battling primal instinct, grabbed for their officer, hauling him back from the crumbling edge. Alexei didn't think. He dove. He slid on his belly like a seal, his hands reaching, the freezing seawater soaking through his parka in an instant, the cold a punch to his heart. His fingertips brushed the oilskin. He clawed at it, gripped it, and rolled away as a massive slab of ice calved off and upended into the water with a monumental splash. He came to a stop at Dead's feet. The old mechanic hauled him up with one immense hand, shoving him toward their sledges. "Go!" The word was a bark that cut through the cacophony. They ran. It was not a retreat. It was a rout across a disintegrating world. Behind them, they heard shouts in German, a single snapping gunshot that went wild, zinging off ice. The merman's horn blared, a deep, mournful sound of alarm and departure. The Germans were falling back to their U-boat. The Soviets were fighting to disengage their ship from the ice before it was too late. The rendezvous was over, consumed by the very environment they sought to conquer. They reached their sledges where Sergei was already frantically trying to start the engine. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He had seen it all. The packet, the German, the treason laid bare. Ivan vaulted onto the lead sledge, taking the controls from Sergei with a brutal shove. The engines screamed to life, and they fled, not along their careful path, but blindly into the featureless white, putting distance between themselves and the two warships, now locked in a desperate race to escape the breaking ice field. They drove until the fuel gauges trembled near empty, and the adrenaline bled from their bodies, leaving only a hollow, trembling exhaustion. They established a crude camp on what felt like a more stable floe, a mere scrap of ice compared to their old home. The hut was gone. They were exposed, living in tents, the sledges their only walls against the void. That night, in the cramped, shuddering tent, the fragile truce shattered. Sergei stood, his back to the small heater, his shadow a monstrous, flickering giant on the canvas. You gave it to him. Sergei's voice was quiet, deadly calm. You had a package for the intelligence officer. I saw your little pantomime. You planned to hand over state secrets to a stranger while a German U-boat watched. You are traitors. All of you. Ivan, cleaning his pistol with methodical slowness, did not look up. The state secret, Sergei, is the weather. The secret is that we are losing. The convoys are being slaughtered. The front needs a second front. What was in that packet might help create it. That is our duty. A higher duty. Higher than the motherland? Higher than our orders? Sergei spat the words. There is no higher duty. You have created your own little state out here, Ivan, with your own laws, your own loyalties. It ends now. The next transmission, I report everything. The falsified logs, the clandestine data, the attempted handoff, and the German who almost got it because of your incompetence. The air left the tent. Dead slowly put down the gear he was mending. Alexei felt the cold seep into his bones, deeper than the Arctic chill. Ivan finally looked up. His eyes were the color of the ice outside. There will be no next transmission. You would kill me? Sergei whispered, a strange, defiant light in his eyes. To protect your treason? Then you are no better than the fascists out there. I am not going to kill you, Sergei, Ivan said, his voice terribly tired. I am relieving you of duty, effective immediately. You are a security risk. Dead. Disarm the radio. Remove the primary encryption module. Sergei keeps his sidearm for the polar bears. It was a sentence worse than death. To be stripped of his purpose, his connection to the center, his very identity as the keeper of the truth. To be made a prisoner, armed but powerless, in a white hell. Sergei stared, disbelief curdling into a venomous, silent hatred. He did not move as Dead, with apologetic but firm hands, went to the radio sledge and began dismantling its heart. The constant, comforting static of the open channel died, leaving only the howl of the wind. They were now truly alone, cut off not just by ice but by choice. Days bled into one another. The camp was a prison of cold and stifled rage. Sergei sat apart, a brooding statue, his eyes recording their every move, building his case for a future tribunal that might never come. Alexei worked, but his focus was broken. The near loss of the packet had scarred him. He saw the German's face in his sleep. He triple-checked his calculations. The Neptune-Juno window, now an obsession bordering on madness. Was it correct? Had the stress, the terror, clouded his judgment? Their fragile existence hinged on one hope. The emergency transmitter Dead had built. The ugly, beautiful scrap heap device hidden in the generator housing. It had one frequency, one burst capacity. It was their final bullet. To use it was to light a beacon, potentially for friends, absolutely for enemies. It could only be fired once the forecast was absolute and the destination for the data was clear. 2 weeks after the disaster at Grid Point Vega, Alexei found it, the final piece. Correlating the last balloon data with a fragment of a commercial weather report intercepted from Canada, he saw the alignment, a high-pressure ridge building stubbornly off the Azores, a corridor of possibility. He could feel it in his bones, the certainty colder and harder than the ice. He finalized the chart. The prediction was complete. He showed it to Ivan in the dim tent light. Ivan studied the lines, the dates, the confident, tragic stroke of the pencil that pointed to a Normandy beachhead no Soviet citizen was supposed to know about. He looked at Alexei, seeing the toll the vision had taken, the hollow eyes, the trembling hands of a prophet who had seen too much. "It is ready," Alexei said, his voice raspy from disuse. Ivan nodded. He took the packet, the one Alexei had rescued from the sea. It was damp, the ink slightly runny, but legible. A perfect metaphor for their truth. Water-stained, battered, but unbroken. "Then we fire our bullet," Ivan said. "Tonight." But as they prepared, Dead, on watch outside, gave a low, sharp whistle. He pointed east, into the twilight gloom. A shape, dark against the ice, not a bear, a figure, moving with purpose, then another, skimming across the ice on skis. The Germans from the U-boat had not forgotten. They had tracked them. The hunter had finally found the fox's hole, and the fox had just decided to light a signal fire. The siege of ice and silence was over. The war had found them. The figures on skis were not a patrol. They were a scalpel. Two men, moving with a lethal, gliding efficiency across the pressure ridges, their white parkas making them phantoms against the snow. They carried compact assault rifles, and their path was a straight, unwavering line toward the camp. The breaking ice at the rendezvous had delayed them, but not deterred them. They were professionals, and the scent of the Prometheus secret was a powerful lure. Inside the tent, time compressed into a single crystalline point of crisis. The German officer's polite, knowing smile flashed in Alexei's mind. They hadn't come for prisoners. They had come to silence the source and steal the product. Ivan's mind switched into a cold, tactical gear. The sledges were their only cover, a pathetic barricade of metal and canvas against trained soldiers. The emergency transmitter was their only hope, a beacon that would now also be a homing signal for those soldiers. They were trapped in a brutal equation. Send the data and die, or fail to send it and render every sacrifice, including Yuri's rotting feet and the ghost of their old station, utterly meaningless. "The ridge," Ivan said, his voice a low, urgent rasp. "The one to the north with the overhang. It has a direct line of sight to the Allied listening post in Iceland. It's the only place the burst transmitter has a chance." Alexei followed his gaze. The ridge was a jagged scar of upthrown ice 300 meters away, a brutal climb across open ground. "They'll cut us down before we're halfway," Sergei said flatly from his corner. He had not moved, but his eyes were alive, tracking the approaching skiers, then Ivan, then the precious packet. He was calculating survival odds in a collapsing world. "Not if we don't all go," Ivan said. He was already moving, pulling apart the housing of the main sledge's generator. He revealed Dead's Frankenstein transmitter, a nest of wires, valves, and a heavy, stumpy antenna. "One man goes, one man sends. The rest provide a diversion. Make them think we're all here, fighting for our lives. Make them think the data is here." He looked at Dead. The old man understood. A diversion meant noise, movement, sacrifice. It meant giving the sniper on the ridge a clear, attractive target. Dead gave a single, solemn nod. He hefted a heavy wrench in one hand and a red emergency flare pistol in the other. "I'll make it a good show. Plenty of smoke." Then Ivan turned to Sergei. The tension between them crackled in the frozen air. "Sergei, you have a choice. You can stay here, a prisoner of your dogma, and be shot by Germans. Or you can pick up that rifle you've been cleaning for a week and defend your comrades and your motherland's true interest for the first time. Not on paper. Here, on the ice." Sergei's face was a war zone. Every principle he held was being burned down by the reality of the German rifles. His loyalty to the state clashed with the visceral, immediate understanding that the state's enemy was right outside, and the state's secrets were in Ivan's hands. With a sound that was half snarl, half sob, he snatched his moistened Nagant rifle from its case and began loading it with sharp, precise movements. He had chosen a side. It was the side of the living. "Alexei," Ivan said, his voice softening imperceptibly. He thrust the transmitter, now strapped to a portable battery pack, into Alexei's arms. It was heavier than it looked. Then he pressed the oilskin packet into his chest. "You are the mission now. Your brain, your work. You run. You do not look back. You get to that overhang. You set the frequency to the crystal Dead showed you. You press the transmission trigger, and you hold it until the battery dies. You burn our location into the ether. You burn the forecast home. You are the voice of this place now. Go." There was no time for goodbye, for gratitude, for fear. Dead kicked open the tent flap on the opposite side from the approaching Germans and fired the flare pistol. A blinding red comet shot into the twilight sky, trailing thick, acrid smoke. He bellowed, a wordless, challenging roar, and began pounding on the sledge's metal hull with the wrench, creating a shocking, metallic clamor. The Germans reacted instantly. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the tent canvas where Dead had just been. The fight was on. Alexei ran. He clutched the transmitter to his chest like a child, the packet stuffed inside his parka. He scrambled away from the tents, away from the gunfire, into the labyrinth of smaller ice chunks and wind-sculpted drifts. The cold air tore at his lungs. Each footfall was a thunderclap in his ears. He expected the searing impact of a bullet in his back at any second. Behind him, the diversion unfolded with terrible clarity. Dead and Sergei were now an unlikely, desperate team. Dead, a moving, shouting target, drawing fire, answering with the inaccurate but terrifying blasts of the flare gun, setting a sledge cover ablaze with a second shot. Sergei, the perfect shot, had found a niche between two fuel drums. He breathed out, slowed his heart, and became the instrument of his training. His first shot rang out, sharp and clean. One of the white-clad figures on the skis jerked and crumpled, a dark flower blooming on his chest. The remaining German went to ground. The easy approach was over. This was now a duel. Alexei reached the base of the ridge. It was a sheer, blue wall of ice, slick and treacherous. He began to climb, his gloves slipping, his boots scrabbling for purchase. The transmitter on his back threatened to pull him backwards into the abyss. Below and behind he heard the staccato conversation of gunfire, the controlled short bursts of the German's automatic weapon, the answering deliberate crack of Sergei's rifle, and the sporadic fiery pop of Dead's flare gun. He was halfway up when a new sound joined the symphony, the low, grinding hum of an aircraft engine. A skeletal Arado R-196 float plane, launched from the U-boat, emerged from a bank of cloud. It circled once, a shark in the gray sky, then dove toward the camp. The diversion had worked too well. They had called in the ultimate overwatch. The Arado's machine guns opened up, stitching a line of massive, ice-shard explosions across the camp. The fuel drum Sergei was using for cover exploded in a fireball of orange and black. The concussion wave hit Alexei like a physical blow, nearly dislodging him from the ice. He clung on, fingers bleeding, and looked back in horror. He saw Dead, caught in the open, throw his wrench at the strafing plane in a final, futile act of defiance. The next burst of fire from the Arado walked across the ice and tore the old man apart. Sergei, his position obliterated, was crawling, his leg a mess of torn fabric and blood still trying to reach his rifle. And he saw Ivan. Ivan was not fighting the German on the ground. He was sprinting, not away from the plane, but perpendicular to Alexei's ridge, into the open, waving his arms. He was making himself the biggest, most tempting target left, drawing the eye of the pilot away from the small, climbing figure on the ice wall. The Arado banked, turning its nose toward this new, defiant prey. Alexei wanted to scream, to stop, to help, but Ivan's last order echoed in his skull. You are the mission now. He turned his face into the ice, tears freezing instantly on his cheeks, and climbed with a feral, desperate strength born of grief and rage. He hauled himself over the lip of the overhang. The world fell away, below. The camp was a diorama of devastation, smoke, fire, tiny figures. The Arado was lining up for another run on Ivan's solitary running form. Alexei's hands, numb and bleeding, worked with a speed he did not know he possessed. He jammed the antenna into a cleft in the ice. He connected the wires, his breath coming in sobbing gasps. He flipped the switches in the sequence Dead had drilled into him. A small green light flickered to life on the crude panel. Power. He pulled the packet from his chest. The paper was damp, the runny ink a blur, but the lines, the dates, the fateful prediction were clear. He pressed the transmit button and held it down. A thin, piercing whine emitted from the device, a concentrated beam of coded information shooting into the darkening sky, aimed at Iceland, at London, at the future. He imagined it as a physical thing, a luminous thread spun from agony and insight, weaving its way through the polar night toward the war room of General Eisenhower. Down on the ice, the Arado's guns chattered again. Alexei did not look. He kept his thumb jammed on the button, his eyes squeezed shut, pouring every ounce of his will into that electronic scream. He transmitted for Dead, for Yuri, for Ivan running across the ice. He transmitted until the green light on the panel flickered, dimmed, and went out. The battery was dead. The bullet was spent. The silence that followed was deafening. The transmitter was empty. He was empty. Slowly, mechanically, he rose to his knees and looked down. The Arado was banking away, its work done. The camp was still. He saw no movement, only the dark scattered shapes on the white canvas. He was alone, on a ledge of ice, at the top of the world. The data was gone, hurled into the void. The only sound was the ceaseless, mocking wind. The Arctic had taken its payment in full. All that remained was the echo of a prediction, flying south through the static, and a single, frozen witness. Alone on the ridge, Alexei existed in a state of shock so profound it felt like a new element. The cold was no longer an external force, it was the substance of his bones. The silence after the transmitter's whine was absolute, a vacuum that sucked meaning from the world. Below, the camp was a frozen, still life of horror. The blackened scar of the fuel fire, the twisted metal of the sledges, the dark, scattered shapes that were no longer men. He did not allow himself to process it. Survival was a mechanical script. He climbed down, his body moving with a numb, automatic precision. He avoided looking at Dead, at the place where Ivan had fallen. He focused on one thing: Sergei. He found the radio man slumped against the wrecked sledge, his leg a grotesque sculpture of frozen blood and splintered bone. A bullet had also grazed his temple, leaving a slick of crimson ice in his hair. But his chest still moved in shallow, ragged hitches. He was alive. With strength he did not possess, Alexei dragged Sergei into the least damaged tent. He used torn strips of a blanket and splints made from broken crate wood to immobilize the shattered leg. He melted snow over a tiny, precious flame from the last hexamine stove. He forced warm water between Sergei's blue lips. The man's eyes fluttered open once, glassy with pain and trauma, seeing nothing. For 3 days, Alexei tended to Sergei and to the corpse of the camp. He scavenged. He found a half-crate of hardtack, a can of condensed milk frozen solid, a few remaining fuel bricks for the stove. He found his own weather kit, miraculously intact. And he found Ivan's pistol, with 7 rounds remaining. He kept the stove burning just enough to keep Sergei from dying, letting the cold claim the rest of the space, preserving their meager resources. He ate once a day. He slept in fitful bursts, the pistol in his hand, starting at every groan of the ice, expecting the Germans to return and finish the job. On the 4th day, Sergei's fever broke. He woke lucid, his gaze clearing to take in the devastation of their existence. The boy meteorologist now his keeper. He said nothing for hours. Then, his voice a dry rasp, he asked, "The data?" "Gone," Alexei replied, staring at the tent wall. "Transmitted. They're all gone." Sergei absorbed this. The great treason was complete. The secret had flown, and the men who had carried it were dead, except for the 2 broken remnants left behind. The ideological war in his mind was over, ended not by debate, but by German machine gun fire. He gave a slow, painful nod, a gesture of acceptance of a terrible, shared burden. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles to the south, in a cramped, smoke-filled map room at Southwick House near Portsmouth, another kind of tension reigned. It was a tension of poised armies, of thousands of ships huddled in English ports, of young men waiting in the damp English spring. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stalked the room, his face etched with the weight of the world. On the wall, a giant map of the Normandy coast was flanked by weather charts. The date was June 4th, 1944. The invasion, Operation Overlord, was set for dawn on June 5th. The room was filled with the senior Allied commanders, Montgomery, Tedder, Ramsey. But the most important men were the meteorologists, led by the dour Scotsman, Group Captain James Stagg. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and despair. "It's no good, Ike," a senior admiral muttered, jabbing a finger at the chart. "Channel Force 8. 10-foot swells at minimum. The landing craft will be swamped before they see the beach. The airborne will be scattered to the winds. It's a recipe for a bloody disaster." The reports from their own networks were a chorus of doom. The Atlantic weather stations, their own ships, the balloons, all told the same story. A deep and violent low-pressure system was barreling toward the channel. The window was closed. Eisenhower's eyes were fixed on Stagg. "Is there any shift? Any hope?" Stagg, exhausted, shook his head. "The models are consistent, General. The front is locked in. June 5th is impossible. The 6th looks worse. We are facing a postponement of at least 2 weeks." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 2 more weeks of holding the most secret invasion in history. 2 more weeks of morale crumbling. 2 more weeks for German defenses to strengthen. The decision to postpone was made. A grim, reluctant consensus. The machinery of the greatest invasion fleet in history ground to a sickening, demoralizing halt. Eisenhower issued the order, each word tasting of ash. He dismissed the room, but asked Stagg to remain. Alone with his chief meteorologist, Eisenhower's shoulders slumped. "Is there anything, James? Anything at all you're not telling the committee? A hunch? A fragment?" Stagg hesitated. He walked to a secure, locked briefcase. There is an ancillary report, sir. Not from our networks. It came through channels from the Arctic, from the Soviets. Decrypted yesterday. Eisenhower's head snapped up. The Soviets? What do they know about our weather? They know about the Atlantic's weather, sir, Stagg said, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The paper was a decrypted translation. The original data was noted as degraded, water-stained, source compromised, but highly reliable. It's a focused, predictive model. It doesn't look at the whole North Atlantic. It looks at the gap. Here. He pointed to the chart. The Soviet data, plotted now on their own map, told a different story. It acknowledged the powerful, dominant low. But it predicted, with a strange, stubborn certainty, a brief, fragile wrinkle in its trailing edge, a temporary weakening of the winds, a short-lived ridge of slightly higher pressure sneaking in behind the storm. It wasn't good weather. It was merely possible weather. And it pinpointed the phenomenon to a 36-hour window, the pre-dawn hours of June 6th, lasting through the day. It's a hell of a risk, Stagg murmured. Their data is idiosyncratic, but the physics are sound. It's like predicting a single breath of stillness in a hurricane. Eisenhower stared at the Soviet isobars, overlaid on their own. Two realities. One, a solid wall of storm. The other, a whispered suggestion of a crack in that wall. His own intelligence said the Germans, relying on their limited Atlantic data and the same grim forecasts, believed invasion was impossible for weeks. Their top commanders, like Rommel, had even left their posts. The weight of the decision was astronomical. Trust the consensus, wait, and risk strategic catastrophe. Or trust a faint, battered signal from the top of the world, sent by men whose fate he would never know. He called the commanders back. The atmosphere was even heavier. He had them look at the two charts side by side, the solid Allied forecast of doom and the fragile, water-stained Soviet prediction of a sliver of chance. "Gentlemen," Eisenhower said, his voice low but clear in the tense silence, "we have a discrepancy. Our enemy thinks we are stopped. Our primary science says we are stopped. But this says there is a narrow door. It will slam shut behind us. The seas will be high. The clouds will be low. It will be brutal. But it might be just enough." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each man, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. He saw doubt, fear, but also a flicker of desperate hope. The question is not whether we want to go. The question is, do we dare to believe this tiny, impossible voice from the ice? He let the silence stretch, the fate of the free world balanced on the edge of a razor. Then he spoke the words that would bend history. "I am not willing to give up the advantage of surprise. We have one chance to believe in a miracle of bad weather becoming marginally less bad. We go tomorrow. We go on the 6th. In the Arctic, Alexei, unaware, recorded the weather with robotic dedication. The pressure was rising, the wind was shifting just as his model had predicted. The sliver of stillness was beginning. He looked at the sky, seeing not clouds, but the ghost of his own calculations made real. He had been right. The knowledge was a cold, lonely comfort, buried in a tomb of ice. The days after the transmission were a slow-motion death. The camp was a graveyard of metal and memory. Alexei existed in a hollowed-out state, a machine of survival. He rationed the last fuel bricks, the last slivers of hardtack. He kept the small stove burning only long enough to melt water and warm the space near Sergei's unconscious form for an hour each day. The rest of the time, the cold was a third occupant, silent and patient. Sergei drifted in a feverish twilight. The wound in his leg, crudely set and without antibiotics, festered. The smell of gangrene, faint but unmistakable, began to blend with the smells of fuel and frost. Alexei fought it with boiling water and torn strips of a relatively clean shirt. But it was a battle against inevitability. He talked to Sergei as he worked, not knowing if the man could hear. He spoke of the weather data, of the pressure readings he was still taking, out of habit, out of a last shred of purpose. He told him the barometer was doing exactly what his model predicted. It was a confession and a eulogy. On the morning of what his mental calendar marked as June 5th, Sergei's eyes opened. They were clear, free of fever for the first time. It was not a sign of healing, but of a final, cruel lucidity. The poison was in his blood now. He looked at Alexei, at the squalor of the tent, and understanding dawned in his gaze, not just of their situation, but of the larger picture. "The date," Sergei whispered, his voice a dry leaf rustle. "It is soon. Your window." Alexei just nodded, spooning a few drops of warm water onto his cracked lips. "You must see it," Sergei insisted, a ghost of his old authority returning. "You must record it. For the record. Proof." "Proof doesn't matter anymore," Alexei said, his own voice flat. "We're the record, and the record is dying here." "It matters," Sergei gasped, a sudden intensity seizing him. He gripped Alexei's wrist with a shockingly strong hand. For them, for Ivan, for Dead, or it was all noise. A fit of coughing racked him, and he fell back, spent. The words dug under Alexei's numbness, or it was all noise. The thought was unbearable. That their sacrifice, the spilled blood on the ice, the stolen data, might vanish into the fog of war, unverified. A footnote of maybe. He had to know if his prediction, bought at such a price, was true. He bundled himself in every remaining layer. He took the pistol, the notebook, the thermometer. He gave Sergei the last of the water within reach. "I'll be back before dark." The world outside was a different place. The screaming, malevolent wind was gone. In its place was a strange, heavy stillness. The sky was not clear. It was a low, uniform ceiling of dove-gray cloud. But it was stable. The temperature had risen markedly. It was still far below freezing, but the knife's edge quality was absent. It was, by the brutal standards of the Arctic, benign. He climbed to his ridge, the transmission ridge. He did not look toward the camp below. He set up his instruments with trembling hands. The mercury in the thermometer climbed higher than it had in months. The anemometer spun lazily, registering a gentle breeze from the southwest, the predicted shift. He released his last weather balloon, a forlorn white sphere swallowed by the gray wool of the sky. His calculations, scrawled in the notebook, confirmed it. The high-pressure ridge was nosing in. The storm track had shifted, just slightly, just enough. The sliver of operational weather was a real, measurable phenomenon. It was here. Over the English Channel, it would be D-Day. At that moment, the proof in the sky was not a triumph. It was a desolate, crushing validation. He was right, and everyone who had believed in him was dead. He sat on the ice, and for the first time since the attack, he wept. Great. Heaving sobs that froze on his parka, wept for Ivan and Dead, for Yuri's lost feet, for Sergei dying below, for his own stolen future. He wept until he was empty. The sound that cut through his grief was not the wind. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming, felt more than heard through the ice. Then a distant, deep-throated roar. Aircraft engines, many of them. He scrambled to the highest point, shielding his eyes. To the south, emerging from the perpetual haze, was a sight that defied belief. A vast, dark swarm, like migrating metal birds. The lead formations of the Allied airborne armada, hundreds of C-47 Dakotas and gliders crawling across the sky. They were so far away they were silent specks, but their numbers painted a dark river in the gray. They were heading southeast, toward France, toward Normandy. He had seen aircraft before, the lone German Arado, the rare Soviet patrol plane. But this was different. This was a tidal wave of machinery and men, a force of nature he had helped to enable. The abstract Second Front was now a roaring, tangible reality in the sky. The data was no longer numbers on water-stained paper. It was this. It was the distant, thundering passage of history. He watched, mesmerized, until the last of the swarm dissolved into the gloom. The silence that returned was deeper, more profound. It was the silence of a world holding its breath. When he returned to the tent, the light was fading. Sergei was awake, his eyes glinting in the gloom. "Well?" The single word cost him dearly. "The weather," Alexei began, his voice raw. "It's exactly as predicted. The ridge is there. The winds are down." He paused, swallowing. "And I saw them. The airplanes. Hundreds. Heading south." A strange expression crossed Sergei's face. A relaxation of the perpetual knot of suspicion and pain. It was almost a smile. "So, we were not traitors. We were artillerymen, firing a shell we would never see land." He closed his eyes. "Good." He did not speak again. Alexei sat beside him through the long, slow dusk. He watched the shallow rise and fall of Sergei's chest grow fainter, more intermittent. Just before the final darkness, Sergei's hand twitched, as if reaching for a radio key that was no longer there. Then, he was still. The last guardian of the old truth was gone. Alexei was now the sole inhabitant of a world of ghosts. He didn't move him. He simply sat in the perfect, terrible silence, broken only by the soft hiss of the dying stove. He was the record now, the living, breathing final proof. He had seen the atmospheric confirmation and the martial consequence. He had borne witness to the precise point where science and sacrifice had intersected with history. The weight of it was a physical pressure, a cold denser than the Arctic night settling into his soul. Outside, the strange, operational calm held over the ice cap. It was the same calm that, 1,000 miles to the south, was allowing frightened young men in bouncing landing craft to see the hostile shore of Normandy for the first time. The two realities, the personal cataclysm and the global one, were linked by an invisible thread of isobars and blood. And on one end of that thread, in a ruined tent at the roof of the world, sat the only man who knew it, alive and utterly, completely alone. Time lost all meaning. Alexei existed in a state beyond survival, a kind of suspended animation of the soul. He performed the rituals. He recorded the weather, now a pointless homage to the dead. He ate the last crumbs of hardtack. He burned the last splinter of fuel, and when it was gone, he burned the empty crates. Then the pages of non-essential logbooks, watching their heatless flames gutter in the stove. The cold, no longer held at bay, began its final intimate occupation of the tent. It crept into his joints, a permanent stiffness. It frosted the inside of the canvas, sealing him in a crystal coffin. He knew he was dying. The knowledge was not frightening, but factual, like a final data point. He had completed his equation. The variables of prediction had been replaced by the constants of ice and silence. He lay next to Sergei's frozen body, a companion in stillness, waiting for the end to unspool. His mind, starved and cold, began to play tricks. He heard Ded tinkering with the generator. He heard Ivan's low voice discussing the barometric pressure. He saw the faint, ghostly green glow of the transmitter light on the ridgetop. He welcomed the phantoms. They were better company than the void. The end did not come as he expected. It came with sound. First, a distant, deep-throated vibration through the ice, a bass note that was felt in the teeth. Then, a rhythmic, mechanical thump-thump-thump that grew steadily louder, resolving into the unmistakable thunder of helicopter rotors. A Soviet Mi-4, a workhorse of the Arctic, its shape blotting out the gray sky as it circled the destroyed camp. Men spilled from its belly, bundled in Special Forces white. They moved with swift, tactical precision, securing the perimeter, their weapons scanning the ice ridges. They found the scene of the massacre first, the frozen, blackened evidence of the German attack. Their voices, sharp and urgent, carried on the wind to the tent. Then they found him. The light from the open tent flap was a physical blow. Rough hands pulled him from his frozen bag. He could not stand. His vision swam with figures in fur masks, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and urgency. He was wrapped in thick blankets, a hot water bottle pressed to his chest. A medic poured a shot of pure alcohol down his throat, the burn shocking his system. An officer crouched before him, his insignia marking him as GRU military intelligence. His face was hard, but his eyes were intensely focused. "Alexei Ilyich? You are Alexei, the meteorologist?" Alexei managed a faint, brittle nod. "The data from Station North Pole 6. The Prometheus packet. What happened?" Alexei's lips were cracked, his tongue swollen. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged. He pointed a trembling finger, first to the ridgetop, then to the frozen shapes outside, then to Sergei beside him. Gone. Sent. Dead. The officer understood. He nodded, not with sympathy, but with a profound, professional respect. He barked orders. His men began a meticulous search. They recovered the bodies of Ivan and Ded with solemn care. They documented every shell casing, every scorch mark. They found Alexei's weather notebook, the final entries confirming the June 6th window. The proof was in his hand. The forecast, the officer pressed, his voice low. The invasion, did it happen? In your window? Alexei looked at him, and for the first time a spark ignited in the glacial emptiness of his eyes. He thought of the river of aircraft in the sky, the thrumming in the ice. He thought of Sergei's final words. "We were artillerymen." He drew a shaky breath, forcing his frozen lungs to work. "Yes," he whispered, the word a cloud of steam in the cold air. "It happened. I saw them go." The officer held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. The mission was validated. He stood. "Get him to the helicopter. Priority medical. Recover all remains and evidence. Leave nothing." The flight to the nuclear icebreaker Lenin was a blur of noise and vibration, an agonizing, returning sensation. Thawing was a form of torture. But he was alive. Moscow, October 1945. The war was over. The world was stitching itself back together with maps and grudges. In a sanitarium outside Moscow, reserved for heroes whose wounds were not visible, Alexei walked in a walled garden. He walked with a cane, his body permanently thinned by starvation, his lungs scarred by frost. But he walked. They had debriefed him for months. Men in civilian suits had gone over every second, every decision. They had called Ivan and Ded posthumous heroes of the Soviet Union for their defense of state secrets. Sergei was awarded the Order of the Patriotic War. The narrative was carefully constructed. Valiant polar scientists defending vital meteorological data from a Nazi sabotage team. The truth of the destination of that data was buried in a classified vault, known only to a handful. It was a state secret, atop a state secret. One afternoon, a familiar, limping figure was shown into the garden. Sergei. He was alive, saved by the same helicopter, his leg saved by surgeons after months of fighting infection. He was thinner, older, his face etched with the same permanent cold Alexei felt in his own bones. They stood facing each other, two ghosts from a white hell. No words of forgiveness were spoken, none were needed. They had shared a tomb, and that created a bond deeper than ideology or mistrust. They had both been erased and remade by the ice. Sergei handed him a small box. Inside, on a bed of red velvet, lay two medals, Alexei's own Order of Lenin and Ivan's Hero of the Soviet Union Star. "They thought you should have it," Sergei said simply. He would have wanted it. Alexei took the box, its weight insignificant, its meaning immense. "What will you do?" Sergei asked. Alexei looked past the garden walls to the gray Moscow sky. "The weather," he said. "It's all I know. Present day. The Russian State Museum of the Arctic and Antarctic, St. Petersburg." An old man, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane, moves slowly through the hushed halls. Schoolchildren dart past, their laughter echoing off marble. He stops before a specific display. It is modest, a reconstructed corner of a polar hut, a battered thermometer, a frost-rimed radio headset, and a large blown-up photograph of the 5 men of Station North Pole 6, smiling stiffly in their fur hoods, taken in Murmansk before their deployment. His eyes, pale blue and deeply set, trace the faces. Young Ivan, confident. Ded, squinting at the sun. Yuri, looking away. Sergei, serious. And himself, Alexei, a lifetime ago, his face unmarked by ice or grief. A teenage boy, bored, is pulled along by his teacher. He glances at the display, reading the plaque. Heroic Defense Against Nazi Saboteurs, 1944. Cool. He moves on. The old man, Alexei, does not react. He knows the truth lives elsewhere. Not in the sanitized plaque, but in the memory of the specific quality of the cold on the ridge, in the taste of condensed milk and fear, in the sound of a single desperate electronic whine hurled into the darkness, in the sight of a distant thundering river of aircraft, proof that the numbers were right. He reaches out, his gnarled, trembling fingers not touching the glass, but hovering just above the image of his younger self. He is not here for the museum's story. He is here for the silence between their official portraits, for the unsung, water-stained arithmetic of destiny. He turns and walks slowly toward the exit. The afternoon sun slants through the high windows, cutting through the dust motes. It is a calm day, a day of gentle pressure and light winds. A good day. He knows the type. He steps out onto the street, into the flow of normal, unremarkable life. He takes a deep breath of the mundane air, carrying the faint smells of the city and the sea. Somewhere, in a classified archive in London or Washington, a single sheet of paper with blurred ink and a desperate prediction sleeps in a folder. And here, walking slowly into the sun, goes the last living proof that it was ever sent. A man who was, for a brief, terrible moment, the most important weatherman in the world. Now, just an old man with a secret, listening to the quiet, weather of peace.